Township School District Finance Committee meeting for May 9th, 2017. We are meeting as a committee of the whole because we are going to spend the majority of our time speaking about items related to the upcoming budget, with the goal of being able to vote on our budget at our board meeting of May 23rd. We needed to add this extra meeting in the meeting of the whole in order to discuss a few items. So, that said, with typical committee meeting structure, then Michelle or Ken, do we have, Todd, any administrative remarks?
I do just have one. At a previous Finance Committee meeting, it was brought to our attention that the amount of dollars that were posted to the parking revenue account did not agree with the number of parking spaces at $75 per spot. Upon researching that, we determined that some of the revenue was actually posted to the wrong account. We have now corrected that, and you will see the correction on your financial statements at the next month's meeting.
Great, thank you. All right, then, any public comment at this time? Hello.
Hi, Judy Sherry, Governor's Circle, Newtown Square. Other than not allowing public comment, which is pretty significant, and the fact that the meeting is in a different room and chaired by a different person, Ms. Booker instead of Mr. Falcone, what's the difference between a budget workshop, which included the full board, and a full board finance committee meeting? I tried to look up workshop in policies. When you ask for a search, nothing comes up, but no public comment was permitted during the budget workshop, which was a big disappointment. That's number one. Number two, why shouldn't or can't facility rentals be done electronically? Put that down. Why is there only $20,000 in the budgeted facility rental for the high school next year when this year's revenue is almost $40,000? So that's in that area. Why have administrative employee benefits increased percentage-wise so much more than teachers' benefits, which is a 13% increase for administrators, or at least in that category, 5% for teachers. Also, staff support was minus 2%. I don't know if that's because you lost a support person, but that was significantly lower. How many buses are being replaced for the $251,000? I think that would be helpful just to include that number every year so people could evaluate it that might not know how much buses cost. Now, on the substitute teachers, what is the administration's evaluation of the data on substitute teachers? We received a lot of data. What's the difference in cost for substitutes between this year and last year? Because we're paying them more. We have an increase in pay. And has that increase resulted in an improvement in quality and quantity of coverage? So has the coverage improved significantly with the new service? Are substitute teachers evaluated? And if so, how do this year's subs compare with previous ones? And how do the subs feel about the new service? So I have a lot of questions there. And finally, how does the teacher incentivize teachers to be in the classroom? Do we do any incentivizing of teachers to be there? This two more questions. This was brought up at the last meeting, but this is just a financial comparison. What's the comparison between full and half-day kindergarten expenses? I'd like to see that comparison. And final question, can taxpayers assume or predict that in future years the district will always raise taxes not only to the max under its adjusted index, but will also continue to apply for every possible exception to go even higher? Just putting you on the spot with that question. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll be answering a few of those questions as we go along here this evening. And if we don't answer them this evening, we'll try and pick them up at the next Finance Committee meeting.
Good evening, Cindy
Hello.
Spurtle and Wayne. I have a couple questions, and when I go through and review the information that's been presented, thank you, Ms. Deco. The revenues, I try to look at the swings, the different percentage differences, because that jumps right out at me. And it appears that there are swings either a percentage difference that's less than the prior year budget, or it's greater than appeared in the professional and tech services line account 300, and that seems to run through the regular instruction. Went up 48.8%, but yet in staff support services it went down by 48%. These are high percentage swings when you look at the and I did this looking at the budgeted expenditures, not the projection for this year. And then there's a major additional increase in the budget of 65% for other professional services under staff support services. And I had a question as to what that was. Just a couple more in the breakdown. Once again, under transportation services, and this one was whether this is a reallocation, a movement from another account, but professional and tech services under our transportation accounts went up 1,160%. That's just really strange. And going through the capital improvement plan cost, thank you very much for the explanation of how some of the accounts changed and why. Michelle, that means a lot, the breakdown. I did have one question under Ithan Elementary School. For the playgrounds, the total year-to-date cost is $182,913. That's what is posted, yet in the explanation it shows that $83,313 of that was donated by the PTO, which is a question I did ask in the meeting last couple of weeks ago, which means that actually the cost to the district is only $99,600. And the question was, do you have to show the total cost, whether it's district cost or it was provided by someone else? I think in going back and reviewing, if you put the actual district cost, if you're going forward in your budgeting process and you do a quick review, you might not catch that part of that was donated by someone else. And then back to the bleachers. For the year 2017-18, and sitting in on the meeting, the budget workshop meeting, that the bleachers, the total cost projection was $1 million, but budgeted in coming up in the 17-18 budget is $200,000. That's explained as costs that are going to in design and also in some repair of the bleachers. I went back and read over the minutes, and it looks like the bleachers, at least the from the security company that examined them, that there's probably 3 to 5 year life in the bleachers with some repairs. And the $800,000, the remaining amount of that $1 million appears in the 18-19 school year. So my question is, does it need to be budgeted that quickly in plans for the future? And then going to the substitute, thank you once again for all of the data and evaluation or explanation of this. We'll look forward to. But I noticed one thing on the very first page, and that was and I don't know what AESOP stands for, but it's the building summary for April of 2017. And one thing that kind of jumped out at me was that of the subs that were needed in the high school, almost 50% went unfilled. And my question is, what's with the high school? It seems that the other schools, they were able to fill the substitute, and what are the high school students doing without subs? Or 50% of the high school students on those days. And then the last slide that was presented is the percentage of absence for the different schools. And my question was, how do these percentages compare to prior years? Are we doing better with our new substitute, the company that we signed on with and are paying additional monies to, doing a better job than in previous years? Thank you.
Thank you. And again, I'm sure that we'll be answering a few of those questions as we make our way through the discussion this evening.
Good evening, Roberta Winters, and I know that raising taxes is difficult for many elected officials, and I believe that, as we've heard and discussed in the past, things like class size and other issues are very important that need your total consideration. At the same time, I would like you to be cautious in terms of looking forward, given the many variables happening at the federal and state level that may impact what's happening locally. I don't know what's going to happen in terms of health care legislation at the federal level, but I know there could be some significant changes in Medicaid that will impact things like your reimbursements for special services such as OT, PT, things like that, which we now get a considerable amount of money for. There are lots of things on the horizon that I think we don't want to be blindsided and have adequate funding to provide for that, and also in terms of, as I mentioned previously, the Supreme Court decision regarding special education. Further, I would like to make a comment, as did Ms. Spurtle, regarding the substitutes. And one of the things that I find interesting in the first page of the slides was that in some cases, subs are not needed. And I can remember serving in a position in a public school in this township where sometimes I was deemed as a person who did not need a sub. And I think that's really hard for a person to be in that position, because it means you really don't have a value and you don't need to be replaced. And if you're not replaced, the children are not getting the program or the services that they require. So I think just because a sub may not be needed, it may be a counselor, it may be a special ed teacher, it may be an art teacher, students are not getting the services that they need when they're a substitute not present. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? If not, then let's get started. So, 2016-17 projections. So since we last
Approval
met...
of the minutes.
Oh, thank you. Sure. Anybody have any concerns about the notes from the April 18th meeting?
No, I'm fine with them.
Okay.
I just mentioned it.
I appreciate it. No, I got it. Okay, so let's move on then to the 2016-17 projection. So since we last met, the projections have been provided. This is to take us through the year end based on the best knowledge of our staff for the completion of this school year, and that is intended to help us understand where we land with regards to how much of the fund balance we're using, et cetera. And I believe that Michelle is going to walk us through that. And just for clarity, all the board members got copies of the projections. It was available online, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
The document you have in front of you is dated at the top of May 5th, 2017. It's broken down by revenue and expenditures. You'll note that it also includes the projection as well as some previous year, 3 years of previous history, the 2016-17 budgeted revenues, and the 2017-18 budgeted revenues. Keep in mind that the budgeted revenues for 17-18 are based on the proposed final that the board approved in April. So you can see we've gone down through all of the revenues. We've projected where we anticipate we will end up by the end of June 2016 in all areas, including local, state, federal, and other. There's actually a couple things that I want to point out in regards to the revenues. You can see when we look at the projected revenues for transportation, for special education funding wards of the state, which is on the second page at the very top. We had budgeted $400,000 For revenues in 16-17, we anticipate that we will get roughly 591,000. The reason for that significant increase in that area is the result of changes that we have made to how we bill for the village and St. Edmunds. So we think that those changes that we've been putting in place is starting to pay off. I also want to note that transportation subsidy, which is a couple of lines down, it is budgeted at $852,700, and it shows that the projected amount on that line is $428,487. You also need to add the non-public transportation to that amount of $433,125. So those two numbers make up that $852,700 that's budgeted. Another area to note is the area of E-rate, which is down near the bottom of the 700 or 7,000 functions. You can see that what was budgeted for 16-17 was 70,000. We do only anticipate getting 26,556. And the reason for that is because in 2015-16, if you look at that amount, we received 118,000. Some of that money was actually budgeted in that $70,000, but it came in 90 days prior to the close of the school year. So that is just a shift from one year budget to the next. So overall, in the revenues, the projected revenues are expected to come in at just over $92 million. The budgeted amount was just under $92 million. So we will actually receive more revenue than we had budgeted, we anticipate, for 16-17.
Michelle, may I ask you one quick question there?
Yes.
Why, for the E-rate, so I hear about the discrepancy with regard to the timing of the payment. Why are you budgeting so much less for 17-18, down to 15,000?
So you probably remember we had conversations regarding E-rate. E-rate used to be able to have equipment be reimbursable through the E-rate system. 2015-16 was the last year that equipment was reimbursable, and also in 17-18, cell phones are no longer reimbursable. So we are receiving that reimbursement currently, but in 17-18 we will not receive that.
Okay.
Okay.
Any questions then on the revenue page other than that?
So on the expenditure side, some of the areas that I would like to point out, I'm just going to hit high level, is in the 1100 regular instruction, professional and technical services. You'll see a significant increase there of 48% from one budget year to the next. That is a direct result of our contracting substitute teachers. Substitute teachers had been up in the 100 area of the budget in 15-16, and they have now moved to the 300 object area. So if you look, for example, at the 300 object, you'll see in 15-16 the actual amount was 146, but we're projecting 692,000 for expenditures. That's a direct result of the substitute teachers being charged to that area in 16-17.
So how does that reflect to prior years when it was up in the 100? Is it higher or lower? So we can't really see it.
Well, what happens when it's up in the 100 area, you wouldn't see all of the associated employee benefit costs, like the retirement, the Social Security, and all of that. And what you're seeing in the 300 level is a combination of all of the costs associated with it. We definitely are spending more for substitutes this year because we have an increase in absenteeism. So we've got more absences this year than we had in the past. So that's part of the driving factor. In terms of the cost per day per sub, it's basically the same amount that we had paid in the past.
So, Michelle, in addition to that then, the 100 line of straight wages and salary, which is roughly $500,000 more than what you budgeted for this year, that doesn't even include the substitutes. So whereas that number used to be the substitutes, it's now doesn't include that, but still it's $500,000 higher than you budgeted for this year?
Yeah, but there's some areas where it's less. This is just, you're looking just at the instruction area. There's also salaries in special education, nursing services, things like that. Sometimes people will move around from the time the budget is developed until the time that they're paid. So there's also, although this is higher here in the 1100 area, there's corresponding decreases in other areas as well.
Okay.
Michelle, excuse me, may I ask you a question? I'm sorry to go back to revenues for a second, but didn't we lose a transportation subsidy this year? Or is that going into next year that we're going to be shorter? Because the revenues this year in 2015-16 look to be about the same.
So it's actually in 2017-18 that the amount that we're going to be receiving for transportation subsidy is less, but based on what I budgeted in the 17-18 budget, the net result was very small to the budget when we had to make the change.
Okay, so we were at one point going to lose like $40,000 or $50,000.
Right, but I
and
had
to-
taken that into account when I was developing the budget originally. So when I went to make the change based on the governor's budget that had been released, the amount that I had to take out of the budget was significantly smaller than what we were going to be actually losing, because I was anticipating the loss of that revenue.
Okay, and following along, just one more transportation question now that you're in expenses. If we get a subsidy from the state of $800,000 and our transportation expenses are about $4 million, do you have any idea of how much of that expense goes to busing our own students versus the students here in the district? I guess they're all our students, to be technically correct, but our district students versus students we're taking to the 85 other schools in our boundaries?
We don't actually break it down in that much detail because we're not required to do that on the expenditure side. If you're interested in that information, we can do some cost calculations and provide that information for you, but there's no easy way for me just to look at the general ledger and tell you what the cost is.
Yeah, I didn't imagine you'd have a number, but I'm just thinking, are we paying of that $4 million a tremendous amount to bus kids in this community to other schools besides our district?
We probably spend just as much money to bus our own students as we spend to bus non-public students. But don't forget, some of our most expensive transportation needs are related to special education students who are traveling far distances to attend school. There might just be a small number of kids being transported, maybe 3 or 4 on a bus to a location that may be 45 miles or more away.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Michelle, can I ask you a question? A what if? So, where do we see access billing reimbursements?
So access billing, you probably recall that we have been involved in an appeal process with Access for a number of years, at least 3 years. So we have been budgeting for access revenue. We decreased the amount substantially that we budget for access revenue, but we haven't actually been drawing down those funds only because we have to pay back the state and the Department of Public Welfare quite a bit of money for 2 years of the appeals that we know about. The third year of the appeal we're still working at. It's something that we will definitely be looking at, access. Currently, we're not generating enough revenue to cover the cost of the employee that's dedicated full-time to the access program. While it used to be a moneymaker for many school districts, it does not generate the type of revenue that it had in the past. So we'll be looking at that in more detail. Probably in the 17-18 year. This budget does include, 17-18 does include some revenue for access billing. So we will probably be drawing down those funds in 17-18, but we haven't determined specifically how much that will be.
All right, so my what if question is, what if, as a result of federal changes, we do not get reimbursement for OT and PT and things like that, that we're required to offer students because it's written in their IEPs right now. So where are we going to see that hit in this budget?
Well, you won't see it hit in this budget because we're currently not using our access dollars for those types of things. We do use our IDEA funds for that, And IDEA, if you look on the revenue side, it's in function 6832, so it's up midway down in the 600 revenue from 6,000 revenue from local sources. You can see that what's budgeted, anticipated in 16-17, budgeted in 16-17 and 17-18 is $474,619. So that revenue would come out. Those dollars we do use specifically for special education purposes. That would mean that we would need to come up with, if that's no longer allowable, we'd need to come up with the percentage of those dollars that we use for physical therapy and occupational therapy.
All right. So in this 6832, you've got roughly $500,000, and of that, can you give me a percentage? How much do you think we might be?
I'm going to ask Penny, because she just did the.
I don't want to put anybody on the spot. You don't have to answer me right now.
Know how much we use for physical therapy and occupational therapy? Probably not off the top of your head.
And speech.
Related services, right?
Yeah, I don't know if they're cutting it all.
Okay. So we do not know that number right off the top of our head, but we can look at that. Penny's saying that
Yeah.
she doesn't think we actually used it for physical therapy and occupational therapy, but let us look into that and we'll report back.
Because, and Chuck actually just whispered in my ear, we think it might also include all related services, including speech and, so that could be a bundle of money if it pans out as the federal new healthcare, is outlined. So we should probably, and I don't want to put anybody on the spot now, but we should probably think ahead if that occurs, because we have to still provide those services.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So back to expenditures. Most of these are pretty standard in terms of where they're coming in with regards to the budgeted amounts that were projected for 16-17 and the projections, the actual projections for 16-17. I do want to address a specific question that was asked earlier by Mrs. Spurtle regarding transportation in the area of 2,700 professional and technical services, which is the 300 object code. And you'll see that it went from being a budget of $4,750 to $59,875. That's a result of propane buses. We purchased propane buses. Gasoline is charged down in the 600 area, so you'll see the reduction in the 600 area there for transportation. But propane is charged in the 300 object code. So that's what makes up that difference. It's just
As a matter of interest.
a matter of interest. Well, that's the way the public school code tells us we need to code it.
Is that right?
Yes. If you look in your budget book, you've got the object and functions, and you'll see that Bible that we use, so to speak, for where we charge everything. So I don't think it makes much sense myself, but I have to do what the state tells me I have to do.
Okay.
Overall, when we look at our projections for 16-17, you'll notice that when we approved the budget,
I don't think we understand it. Didn't get an answer to that question yet.
Okay.
So-
So you want to put forth a question? Or you want me to? We didn't follow where you said this money was. So it's in the transportation, 2,700?
okay, go to page 4 of 5.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll look at the top. See where it says 2,700 function?
Yep.
See the 300 object code, professional and technical services? It went from a budget in 16-17 of $4,750 to a budget request in 17-18 of $59,875. Okay, that's the direct result of the propane. And then look at the 600 supply line. You'll see a reduction there from the 16-17 budgeted expenditures of $393,924, and the request for 17-18 is $304,856.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And that's where the gas was.
And that's where gasoline is charged. So we're buying propane instead of diesel. Okay? So
I like it.
when we approved the budget for 16-17, originally, we had anticipated that we would use $1,476,996 in fund balance. Of that fund balance, $1.4 million roughly was to come from the PSERS Rate Stabilization Fund, which is an assigned fund balance.
Can you read those numbers? It's not in here. Thank you.
PSERS
What
was
was the original plan?
to use,
To balance the 16-17 budget.
was to use $1,476,996.
Of our fund balance, which included the PSERS amount of,
$1,373,324.
and then the balance was coming from,
Unassigned, and that was 103,672.
okay?
So when we look at our projections for 16-17, the revenue is projected to be approximately $92,168,688. Expenditures are expected to be roughly $93,158,741. So we are still going to need to use fund balance to balance the budget for 16-17. We are going to need, if I take the difference between the revenues and the expenses, $990,073. So when we compare, 990,073. So when we compare what we had anticipated using, just under 1.5, to what we think that we will actually use based on the projections, the 990, the difference between those two numbers is $486,223. That's fund balance that we had anticipated using that we are not going to be needing to balance the 16-17 budget. And that will lead us into some conversations that we're going to have about the 17-18 budget year.
486, you just said, right?
486,223.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay? And I'll just make, and we'll request what would be, I think they asked last time, but I'll follow up with you offline in terms of what I was thinking of. But I really feel like at the bottom of this, not just for this year, but for all of the years, we need to have a line in here that shows what the either the excesses were. Sorry, just for ease and clarity, it would be helpful to have a line at the bottom of these for every column, not just for this year, that says what the use of fund balance was to balance the budgets. Or it's either increase or decrease to fund balance to balance the budget. Would just be helpful at a glance on the bottom of this page 5.
Yep. That's certainly easy enough to add.
Perfect, thanks. Okay, so that is the discussion on projections. Are there any questions related to projections? Otherwise, we're going to roll into the budget discussion, which the projection will help to inform. I was trying to look at some of the questions as we went through. There was a question earlier about the 13 versus 5% for the benefits for teachers versus admin. I don't know if that was something that you can answer quickly now, or if we need to roll back to that.
I think I have to roll back to that one.
Okay. And the high school facility rentals being down, was that one that you're familiar with off the top of your head, or we want to look at that one for the next meeting as well?
I will look at that one a little bit further as well.
Okay. And then, oh no, well, I'll save that question for the capital question. Okay, all right. Anybody have any other questions about the projection? Discussion.
I just want to make sure I understand. So the 486,223 is the amount of money less fund balance that we needed than we thought we did. Is that correct? Am I?
It's our
Yep.
under budget.
Budget,
Yes.
right.
We're under
We
budget.
thought it would be 1.476996, but we're actually needing 486,223 less
Oh,
from
yeah.
that.
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
Less
correct.
from that. I know I'm saying it probably
It's all right.
not in the smoothest way, but I just,
990,000 instead of 1.4 million.
thank you.
So we're not using as much of our savings.
923, not 223.
Okay. All right, so we're clear on projections. Let's roll into the discussion on budget. You want to do capital first?
I was just asking Ken that. I don't know if it makes more sense for us to talk about capital first and then go into the budget.
Yeah, because it
that's-
informs the budget, so why don't we
it's
just do
gonna
that?
Form the
Okay.
budget. Okay, so let's look at capital.
And this is a result of the Facilities Committee work, yes?
Correct. The Facilities Committee met last week. We had a lengthy discussion about the capital improvement plan. What you have in front of you is a result of that plan. There were some suggestions at the meeting that we try and highlight the differences from one report to the next, so I've tried to incorporate those in with the green highlights. The yellow highlights, of course, are reference to a project that was transferred from a prior fiscal year. So let's go right to the administration building page. The first page that you have is just a summary of the various projects through current requests through 2021. You can see there that the HVAC, I think everyone is familiar with the fact that that project was actually moved and it was completed this spring. So that adjustment has been made to remove it from the 17-18 budget year. And then the $2,500 that's down under maintenance equipment, that was an insurance claim, and that was offset by a deposit from Radnor Township for the Silpezio gym.
This one.
So, thank you.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. Whoop. We look at the transportation facility, you can see that we're requesting that the buses actually not be purchased in 16-17, but we purchased those buses in June or July so that they're available for the start of the school year. $251,000, we believe we'll purchase 4 to 5 buses depending on cost and size. So typically we budget for 5 buses. We actually reduce that down to 4, but we think based on the size that will get us either 4 or 5 buses.
So when we purchased those propane buses the last time, the first, our little initial go at it, there was grant money available to help offset the expense. Is there any grant money available for new buses if we're going down this propane bus route?
There is.
And this is the 251 is the net of that number, or?
It does not include any of the grant dollars.
Okay.
That is the actual cost. So what would happen is if we do receive a grant, we would deposit those grant funds back into the capital plan, capital project account, and then those dollars would become available next year to help offset the cost of the buses.
Do we have to apply for the grant actively, or are we part of a more global allocation?
When Mr. Blackburn was here, Mr. Blackburn had actually applied for grant dollars, so we are in the queue to receive those dollars. We will have to apply again once we purchase the buses and show proof that we did purchase them.
So we didn't get the first round of grant money?
We did.
Oh, okay.
We did get the first round.
Uh-huh.
They committed to give us multiple years of grant dollars,
I
so
see.
we have to reapply for that once we actually purchase the buses.
Okay.
And how is this all impacted by, I think we got some kind of update about a handicap bus? Where's that going to get taken care of?
That will get taken care of in this purchase. There were 2 handicap buses, and we talked about this at facilities last week, one larger and one smaller capacity bus. Both of them had engine difficulties in the last couple of weeks, to the point that we don't think that there is any value in replacing the engines. So we're recommending that we move the bus bid up. Typically, Susan, we would do it in September, October, so that the buses would be delivered in January or February. We're going to actually move that up and do it so that we can award it at the June meeting and have those buses delivered in the summer.
So of the 251 that you're talking about spending on buses for next year, 2 of them, originally this conversation was for propane buses, and now the 251 has to cover 2 handicap buses. So are we buying fewer propane buses, or are we going to end up spending more than what's in capital planning 4 buses because we'll still buy the 3 or 4 propane plus the 2 handicap buses? What's the plan there?
So the plan is to do multiple bids so that we can make sure that we're getting the best pricing. And what we will do is we will bid for 4 propane buses and 1 handicap. One of those handicap buses was a reserve vehicle. So we don't think that we have to replace both of them. We think that we can take one of our current handicap buses out, and then we can replace just one of the handicap buses. So we will bid the 4 propane with the intent to award each individual vehicle. So we'll get a price if we buy 1, 2, 3, or 4, and then we'll also bid the handicap bus separately.
So the handicap bus cannot be a propane bus as well? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, no, it can definitely be a propane bus. It depends just how far away that the bus has to travel. So some of our longer runs, we don't use the propane buses on just because the fuel efficiency, there's not enough fuel. But certainly we do intend to purchase handicap buses that are propane.
And Michelle, one last question. How much is that grant when Bert applied for it in the past? And I understand the process of what you were saying, but how much is the grant approximately? Do you remember?
I do not
All
recall.
right, if you could have that for the next finance meeting, thanks.
Okay, great. Next
One
one.
question, similar to we used to purchase one reason why we were purchasing the 5 buses is in 12 years, we'd like to have a complete fleet again, so we have approximately 60 buses, so if we have the 5. Is there any thought moving forward, when will we get back on that schedule so we're on a bus replacement, so at the end of 12 years, the bus goes, we get a new bus?
Well, we asked that question when Bert was proposing propane, and we said that was a guideline, but not a requirement, because I definitely asked that question.
Well, I am asking that question because I think it might be something that we need to discuss as we move forward. Maybe not this year.
So could I ask then that the Facilities Committee takes on the discussion about what our bus strategy replacement should be, or what our bus replacement strategy should be, and whether that number 5 is really a requirement, and
So
then come
Patty-
back to us?
Didn't Bert say these buses lasted longer than the other buses? They had a longer life. Isn't that what I remember him coming up and talking to us
But you
about.
still have to cycle.
Sure. So I
These
think we-
buses may have a longer life, but the ones that we're replacing do not.
Understood. So I think
Those are the ones that are wearing out, and actually, we're going to come back with how much does it cost per mile that we're running these buses, and we want to make sure that we're being efficient with it. And I think it's time that the board realizes we may come back and say, let's get back on with this, because we did it for the 1 year. We didn't purchase the buses. We have some buses that are fairly old. And
But therein lies why some of us were concerned that we were spending more money on buses, on an individual bus at an accelerated rate, knowing that we had a financial constraint.
right.
So I will just ask that we defer that discussion back to the Facilities
Okay. And
Committee where it
we'll
belongs.
come back for it,
And
yeah.
you guys can come back to us and tell us what you think a strategy should be, much like we're going to
Moving forward.
revisit or
Okay.
look to clarify whether our class, just kind of ratify our class sizes. You guys should ratify whether that's really a required plan or just kind of a nice to have.
Plus, that part of that consideration should include utilization. We have never had a really
Yes.
firm utilization, set of utilization stats. So as, we're running a bus, we're driving a route, we're assuming, some percentage of occupancy, what are we actually doing? Because, if you get into anecdotal reports of the rumbling empty buses around the township and beyond, that is a significant contributing factor to how and when we want to
Yep.
address this.
True.
So that ought to be part of it as well.
Okay,
Well,
cool.
What I thought we were doing with the bus replacement was we were going to go with the amount that we wanted and then add the two buses, 2 handicap buses. In other words, I thought we were going to
I don't-
get 6, and
No.
a big one and a little handicap bus.
No. And
That's what I thought we were
Mr.
going
Hearn and
for.
I have had conversations about that. That was never his intention.
Is that true that we've never had a bus utilization survey done before?
I do not know the answer to that, Amy.
It's hard to imagine.
I think it's been quite some time since we heard one.
we've done them. We've
We've done it in the past, and the program that they have has the ability of creating that report, but I don't think we've reviewed it in some time,
We haven't.
at least.
It was
since I've
done
been-
right before the new software was purchased about 5 years ago.
Right.
Yep,
But the new software has the ability to do it.
yep, got it.
Okay, so let's keep going. We're on to Ethan.
Yes, we're on to Ithan Elementary. You can see in green the two changes that were made. In regards to the playground, we do record the entire expenditure. We also will record a revenue. We don't net it out in this fund, and that's why it's netted out on the bottom. So at Ithan, what we are proposing for 17-18 is a section of roof replacement, repointing, upgrades to the restroom hardware. That was a lengthy topic of discussion at the facilities meeting. I don't know, Todd, if you have anything you want to add to that.
Same status, we're looking at pricing
So we'll,
to try to get that cost lower, yes.
and then data wiring for the Ithan Elementary building. At Wayne Elementary,
Wait, I'm just trying to understand the clarity around the playground and what was donated versus what was district. Or I guess, does it really matter? It happened in this school year, right?
it happened in 2016-17. The district paid, excuse me, contributed $40,000 towards the cost of the playground. The entire cost of the playground is the $40,000 and the $83,313 that was donated by the PTO. So it was $123,318.
Then
And
why
then-
does it say 182 then?
Because $59,600 was for site improvements to the playground.
Oh, okay, you
because
put it
of
all
the-
together. Yeah,
because
I
you
see
put it
that
all
now.
together for the playgrounds. And then the $84,127, that's the balance to finish the renovations. The renovations, you will recall, were actually budgeted in 15-16. This is just paying for the balance of those. So those dollars came out of cash on hand for that project.
Oh, okay, so I guess just the confusion here is that it looks like the district paid up in the calculations. I see your information down below, but I'm just doing quick math in my head. It still looks like the district paid for those renovations, and you're saying we didn't. Is there a reason why not to just put the number that the district actually paid up in the chart and put the note below that an incremental 120, whatever it was, 83,000 was donated by the PTO, so that it's much more clear as to what the district's funding was?
I can certainly do that. When I do these reports, I like to be able to tie them back to the general ledger.
Okay.
So that 182,913 ties back to the general ledger
Because there's some revenue up on the,
because there's some revenue
That
up in-
offsets it.
That offsets it.
okay, well, all right, then there's logic in that. Okay. Oh,
So-
okay.
But I can certainly make a change in that regard.
No, I don't,
you'd
if
like
it ties
Maybe
back
just
that
make
way,
it-
then I don't want you to do anything special. I wouldn't recommend you do anything special with it. Now that I understand why you did it that way.
Yeah, if you just make a note at the bottom, you know.
Yeah, it's
It's a
here.
little more, I know it's there, but yeah, don't change the books.
Yeah, agreed.
No, yeah. Well, now that I
It
know
should-
that that's
it
what
should
you're
show
doing
as
with it.
revenue.
Okay.
And you do want to track what we've actually spent, no matter what the source of the cash was.
Okay.
Michelle, so in the column where it's cash on hand, I follow the one for the interior furniture, not so much following the remodel exterior, other than the 100,000 is probably from 15, 16, the capital thing. It just reads like, what do you do with that 108,000 down at the bottom in relation to the 273? Like, where's the math of that? Is that what's actually going to get spent this
So-
year? That's kind of, I'll call it new capital dollars, meaning not cash on hand. Where's that?
So the cash on hand, what happens to the cash on hand is it gets rolled into other projects, and you'll see that on the very last page. When we get to that, I'll explain it to you. But the reason why you're not following the remodel the exterior is exactly what you said. It was budgeted in 15, 16. Remember, we had those two
Yeah.
large pots of money?
Sure.
And so what we do is we keep track of what was budgeted and what was spent year-to-date, and then we just add the cash on hand. So absolutely, if you look at this year-to-date column and you look at the remodel, the exterior, it looks like the district spent $84,000 that wasn't budgeted. The reality is, it was budgeted in 15-16, and this is what we call a rolling fund. So once it's budgeted, it then becomes cash on hand, and that's why I added the cash on hand column, because we really had 187 or 184,000 left from what was budgeted in 15-16 when we started the year.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So this is remainder after 16-17 is expenditures are over.
Correct, and the project is completed.
So could we change the title of that cash on hand column to be something a little
Sure,
more?
I mean, we can change that.
So, okay, yeah, because the way I was reading that, I thought that it was, you were pulling over 100,000 from 15-16 to cover the 127, and rather, it's that you had 127 in 15-16, and so now 100,000's left. You still have that $100,000 available.
Correct.
That, thank
So I'll
you.
change the title from cash on hand.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Thank you.
This makes it more clear.
So let's look at Wayne Elementary. There's not a lot in 17-18. In fact, there's only one item that we're proposing, and that is the replacement of gym doors for $12,000. Those are exterior doors. If you look at the 16-17 year-to-date, again, model the exterior, you can see there that we have $200,000 left after we've made all the payments in 16-17.
Okay.
At Radnor Elementary, we need to do some resurfacing of the playground area. We're proposing that $30,000 be allocated for that.
Wait, Michelle, I'm sorry. I do have one quick question about Wayne. I just caught my eye. The 60,000 for computer technology, I thought that when we did the big renovation at Wayne, we did a whole lot of, I feel like we created a whole computer server room. This is a different project from that?
I'm not seeing.
Bottom of the Wayne Elementary page in the 18-19 year.
That's actually the data wiring, so that's rewiring the whole building.
So that is separate.
That
So
is
when we,
separate.
whatever computer room work we did in conjunction with the renovation over at Wayne, it's not that.
It's not that.
Thank you.
And you're staggering that, right, through the district, building by building?
Correct. Currently, we're working on the administration building, and then we'll do Eisen and Wayne next year, and then we may do some other buildings moving forward.
Okay.
At Radnor Elementary, again, the resurfacing of the playground, we do have some damage to the current playground surface, so we'd like to get that replaced. At the middle school for 17-18, there are wrestling mats that are proposed. The current wrestling mats that the middle school has are in poor condition and are approaching the end of their useful life. I've also been requested to add some windows to the fitness room, not the watershed. I will take that off. That's actually, the watershed is the 2021 $450,000 or $4,500 that you see. The fitness room, if you're familiar with the middle school, is behind the gym. It's an old storage area, and the teachers do not have access to be able to see into that area from the gym if there are students in there, so they would like to have the windows added so that they can see the students that might be utilizing the fitness center. They'd also like to have whiteboards and tack boards installed. That's roughly $1,200. And then there's some stage rebalancing and speaker pendants that we would like to do at the middle school auditorium for $13,000.
Michelle, I'm sorry. On this same sheet, if you budgeted $6,000 for floors and carpet for the middle school, and you only spent the $1,375, I'm assuming that this $1,875 at the bottom in yellow was something you didn't budget, but at the end of the day, there's still $2,750 there left over from a $6,000 budget, and you spent $3,250. So why is the $2,750 not listed as cash on hand?
Because we anticipate that we're going to spend that before the end of the year
Okay.
under the maintenance equipment. there's some additional items that we would like to purchase before the end of the year there.
Okay, so you'll just use up the 6,000?
We'll use that up, yep.
Okay, thanks.
At the high school, there's wrestling mats and a mat lift. Again, their wrestling mats are in poor condition and approaching the end of their useful life. There's also $25,000 for sealant. The bleachers, this is something that we've had a lot of discussion about. What the discussion centered around at the Facilities Committee meeting was that we do now have a report that says that the bleachers are safe and that if we do some minor repairs to them, we can get 3 to 5 more years of useful life out of them. So we've reduced the amount that we're budgeting in 17-18 from the $1 million to the $200,000. We think that doing the repairs to the bleachers will benefit the district. It'll give us more time to be able to review the project and determine the scope of the project. We do want to have some money to be able to do some engineering if we need to do that as we move forward in the project. We believe that we have someone who can help us, a manufacturer of bleachers that's coming out to see us to help us with some of those designs.
So of the 200,000, that's 20% of what, at least we're guessing the project would be, unless until you have a design, there's hard to say what the project overall cost would be. How much of that 200,000 is right now earmarked towards repairs to buy us 2 or 3 years?
25 to 50,000.
Okay, thank you, because that makes me feel a whole lot better about, because that's money under the bridge there, so to speak, if you replace them in 2 to 3 years. That's a reasonable amount of money to spend for. So this 200,000, like you said, though, then included that much for repairs, and then the rest is for design? And we don't really need to spend $150,000 to design
Probably will
bleachers.
not spend $150,000 on design, but we do need to be able to have some dollars in order to do some design engineering on that project. We know that we're going to need an engineer. So if we do not spend what we do not spend, we will roll into the project in the future years. And whether or not we need to budget the $800,000 in 18-19, we'll review that once we determine what the scope of the project is and when it's going to be completed.
So Michelle, Patty, so that brings up a question for me. When I look at 18-19, it's heavy, right? I wonder, we're looking at 1.4 in 18-19. Are we?
But I think you're saying that could be
Maybe.
pushed out by, if you buy 2 to 3 years, you've got 2 to 3 years to build up that.
Okay.
So I guess you're saying after you see the design, you'll push that out potentially? Or spread it out so that we're building up fund balance to be able to pay for whatever the design ends up being?
Yes, but even beyond that, kind of my general question is, we have some bigger expenditures there, right?
numbers.
So we've got the roofs, we've got paving. I mean, all those things, do we know for sure whether or not they're going to hit in 18-19, or is this really placeholders for things that could kind of move further down the line?
So it's really placeholders, Dave. If you look at the very first page, the 5-year summary, you can see that 18-19, just based on all the requests that we have outlined, is almost $2.5 million district-wide. So what will end up happening is, as soon as we get into 17-18, we'll start to meet with principals again. We'll go over the list. We'll look at all of the various projects. We'll move things around. Sometimes we find that building principals might have requested something, but now they've changed their mind, or their priorities sometimes change. So we're always looking at the projects and moving them around.
As an example, the hot water heater, we don't know it's going to die in 18-19. So we just have it in there because it is coming to the end of its useful life, so we're going to keep pushing it until it actually fails, and then we'll replace it.
Sure.
So that's what that $25,000, Dave, for hot water heater at the high school.
Okay.
So, it may, if we don't need it that year, it may get pushed to the following year.
Right on. Thanks.
And are you saying that the engineering study, the goal is to have the bleacher engineering study done during the 17-18 school year so that before we go have our budgeting process take place, we will know for sure what we need to do with that project?
I would say yes, and then we would also want to go out to groups, as the Facilities Committee was talking about, going out to different groups and see if they're interested in contributing any, and almost do a cafeteria, and I think, Patty, you may have said this, or somebody has said this at one point, almost a cafeteria item of what we want to do and what we're can afford and what the other groups may be willing to contribute. So that would be the goal.
Okay. But the good news is we don't have to do it all this year,
Correct.
this coming year.
And we have time to plan. So whether or not we fund it over 1 year or we fund it over multiple years, we have time to plan.
Okay?
And the last thing at the high school is main gym signage. You probably recall, this project has been moved from 14-15 to 15-16 to 16-17. And in 17-18, they believe that they are ready and anxious to get that signage put back up in the gym. So if we look at the very last page, this is a summary of all the budget requests. You can see by buildings. For 17-18, there's just over $1 million worth of requests. There's $722,000 available from previous projects that were completed that hasn't been utilized, or projects that have been pushed and are not going to be completed. And then I've taken off any amounts of projects that we know that are going to be moved forward. So once we get to the end, we've got $682,000 worth of funds that we can apply to the $1 million worth of projects. So if we wanted to complete all of the projects as outlined for 17-18, we would need to transfer $317,000, almost $318,000 to the capital plan.
Okay?
Okay?
Anybody have any more questions about the capital stuff specifically? Okay, so that plus the prior discussion on the projection hopefully then leads us into the discussion of the upcoming budget.
Okay. You want me to kick it off, or you want to kick it off? So since we approved the proposed final budget in April, administration has been working to refine and make changes to the budget and incorporate any changes that we know about. You saw when we did the proposed final, we showed you all the changes that we have made. And so the next part of the budget process continues with us working on projections and refining all of our estimates. So over the course of the last few days, we've been able to identify 3 specific buckets that we would like to present to you.
We're back to buckets.
The superintendent told me he wanted buckets.
Or buckets.
So we'll go over the 3 various buckets, and we'll talk about which dollars are contained in them, and how we think that those can make changes to the budget that we're going to present to you for adoption on the 23rd of May.
So I was told that somebody in the past did use the bucket analogy. I was not aware of, I was not aware of that.
Okay, so we all know what they are.
Okay. I was just thinking about the summer and playing in the, yes, playing at the beach as
There
we
you
were working
go.
on the budget.
Bless you.
God bless you. So in the 3 colorful buckets we have, and I want to thank Michelle for all of her hard work in preparing this budget and just watching all the different variables so closely, because it is, there are so many pieces, as you're all well aware, that come together, and even right down to today and the next few days as well, putting all those pieces together and monitoring them. So in the 3 buckets we want to talk about tonight is bucket number 1, which we discussed here at, I think, the last month's Finance Committee, and that was within our budget for our prescription drug coverage. We had planned for a 9% increase. We have gotten, Michelle has gone and double-checked that, updated prediction now, and we are $300,000 to the good. We have, confirmed that with Caremark and have looked at that very closely. So based on what we had anticipated our increases were as we've been developing this budget, we're about $300,000 to the good when it comes to our prescription drug. We are recommending an adjustment right now to our budget, and we're suggesting that we reduce our use of exceptions by this much because of this bucket. And let me explain the other 2 buckets before we get into the discussion as well. But that would be, sorry, yes. No buckets for you. So that would be the explanation for the reduction in the exceptions, use of exceptions. So in the second bucket, bucket number 2, we are discussing, and I will be discussing an executive session with the board tonight, some administrative adjustments. Since those adjustments involve individuals and personnel, it wouldn't be appropriate right here to discuss them, but as those adjustments move forward, it is something that I will be publicly bringing forward as well, but I want to discuss the ins and outs of the personnel, but we're looking at a savings based on some administrative adjustments. What we're suggesting, based on what is in the budget for administrative positions right now, that we could transfer approximately $150,000 to capital out of this bucket, and then we could also, in addition, we could add another teaching position if needed into the budget to reduce the budget, to address class size if needed. So we wouldn't be reducing the budget, we'd be adding an additional position if needed. We could transfer from this bucket. And we had a discussion at curriculum committee previous to this meeting and talked about our discussion that we had last month at our budget workshop about our class sizes. And we looked at the class sizes both at the elementary, middle school, and high school. And one of the things we discussed is that it's clear that there is an inconsistency with our class sizes at the middle school compared to what our class sizes are and what our targets and what we're aiming for at the elementary and high school. We would like to take some time to figure out why that is happening. As we've looked at it administratively and discussed that, I think it is something that has developed over many years. Is it a direct correlation to the reductions from last year? Maybe. That might be playing a role in it, clearly. But there's also other factors as well. The factors of looking at our schedule, looking how we even schedule within that schedule. What have been other decisions that we have made over the last 5 to 10 years with our middle school program and priorities that have led to the situation we're in now, where we're looking at class sizes that are larger than we'd like to see at the middle school right now. So before we commit additional staff to that, we would like to have the opportunity to add staff if needed. So as we develop that schedule this summer, this bucket would give us an opportunity for an additional position if needed above the positions that we've already built into the budget. We've already have the watch positions we've discussed, so this would be in addition to that if needed. Again, we want to take the time next year to study our middle school. Want to look at why this, why we're looking at the class sizes that we're looking at, and take the time to do it right. I get very nervous with a quick fix, though if we can make some adjustments between now and August, certainly we want to try to do that, but I want to make sure any quick fixes don't create more problems for us as we move forward. So that's what's in bucket 2. Let me explain bucket 3, and then we can go to questions. So bucket number 3, the lovely green bucket, is our unused budget dollars. So that is our, as Michelle just explained and we had just discussed, as we're looking at the end of year and what are we looking at with our unused budgeted dollars from 16-17, this current year. So again, what I would recommend here is that we transfer approximately $150,000 to capital. And then again, out of this bucket, if needed, we could have an additional position to reduce class size if needed. So in summary, what we would be looking to do is we'd be looking to give us the opportunity to have 2 more positions if needed to reduce class size, specifically as we looked at our concerns at the middle school. We'd be recommending that based on the prescription in all 3 buckets that we could reduce our use of exceptions by $300,000. And that we are also, recommending the transfers to capital for buckets 2 and 3 to help us cover our capital for next year.
So just for clarity. So the capital discussion we just had a $317,000 or $318,000, but we still have plenty of money in the capital. So this 150 in the prior bucket, 150 is 300,000, but there's plenty of money in there to cover the rest.
I believe that there is, yes.
Okay.
May I ask a question? The bucket in bucket number 3, behind bucket number 3, those numbers I know are reflected in this updated sheet, right? That 486, we just went through that. Where do we see the savings from bucket number 1 and bucket number 2? How is that reflected in the sheets that we've just gone through of revenues and expenditures?
So the savings from bucket number 1, the prescription coverage, that has not been taken into account yet. So what you will see is the employee benefit line in the 17-18 budget. That will actually be reduced by $300,000. So the expenditures will go down by $300,000 for the prescription coverage.
And not all in one place, right? So Object 200 in each one of these sections would be adjusted accordingly.
Correct. So wherever employees have prescription coverage, it could be anywhere from teachers in the 1100 area to bus drivers in the 2700 area. If they have prescription coverage, their prescription coverage would be decreased by percentage. And then bucket number 2, you actually won't really see that, because what will happen is the administrative adjustments that Ken is going to talk to you about are included in the budget, but will be utilized probably for other things, part of that being the $150,000 for capital. So what will happen is the first 90 days of a budget year, you're not allowed to make a budgetary transfer, but after October 1, we will present a resolution to the board for consideration to transfer $150,000 from the general fund over to the capital fund. And then the teaching position, again, would come out of the changes that are going to be made for the administrative adjustments.
So just for clarity, in curriculum committee, we discussed for sure 2 watch positions. I don't want to call them that. 2
Flex
positions in the middle school, that flex positions that we might need. And so from this analysis, you're saying one of those positions will come from bucket 2 and the other one will come from bucket 3. All right, I
Yes.
see what you're doing.
Ken, so the only question I have about that, and I heard parts of the curriculum committee meeting in terms of the flex positions, and I appreciate your analysis and conversation about the middle school, but it seems that in a number of grades in the elementary school, we also had some higher class sizes. And so I'm wondering, is there, I believe that giving you guys the most flexibility is the best way to balance, the constraints of the finances with the reality of teaching kids and keeping class size down. So I guess I don't understand what the downside is in giving you two teaching positions if needed from this third bucket. I mean, it's all money, so which bucket it comes from doesn't actually matter, but it's a nice visual, and I appreciate that. I guess I don't see the downside in yet even a third flex position, so that could be addressed at the elementary school as well.
And I would suggest, and I'm open to board feedback on this, is that if we need to go above what we're already looking at with our watch positions, so we've already built in watch positions, both trying to monitor the elementary level and K to 12, and we're now looking to put these 2 additional positions in. If we're at a point in July, August, especially in July, and we realize, oh my goodness, look at these high enrollments, look at these changes, I think then we would need to sit down with the board and we could talk to the board. And you're right, there probably is areas within the bucket where we could look to if we needed to go beyond that 2. But right now, based on what we're looking at, we feel like 2 would be the right amount.
Okay, because, I appreciate it. Somebody made the comment earlier about the discussion at curriculum, and probably it's time for the board to ratify the class size conversation. We did ratify it last year. I mean, we had a preliminary budget conversation here, and, our former superintendent and Michelle, and they worked really hard to close the gap last year, and came forward with the proposal to us as a board, if we would consider going up with, by 1 student in an elementary school class, that we could have closed the gap, and we flat out, 9 of us, and it's the same exact board. I mean, this is the board that last year said, no, we're not doing that, we're sticking to class size. So I feel like we already did just for the record, because I don't serve on curriculum, I feel like we flat out said that last year.
And we've done it a couple of times, I would agree.
We have.
And we did, and we talked about that actually at curriculum. I said that even though we look at that document and say it's the year, we did talk about that every year. We do recognize that every year the school board administration does, discuss the class size and do that. That is correct, yes.
I think one of the issues that we did not mention at today's curriculum meeting, but we have mentioned in other sessions, is that we have, because we know what the student-teacher ratio at the middle school is, we have some indication that there are ways to address the problem and potentially address it very effectively by doing some of the changes that Ken is talking about studying. And so it's not necessarily at all obvious that we would need even one or either of these positions, but we do think it's prudent to have them there. But the discussion about how to address the middle school will happen. We will deal with urgent requirements so that it's fixed, so that we're not dealing with huge population overages for this upcoming school year. But the larger issue is, have we effectively done it to ourselves because of the accretions of different practices, different scheduling decisions, different programming decisions, and so forth that have boxed us into a corner that we don't need to be in.
Question,
Well,
how many
or-
flex positions do we have already in the budget? Four already, so two more.
Yes. So we actually have 4 watch, and we have, the way we break it down is 4 watch, but we have 2 additional positions. So we already in the budget, there's 4 watch plus 2 additional positions that we already had discussed.
Which was added this year.
Which was, yes, so we're separate of the buckets. And we are looking at making 2 of those watch positions to become now permanent positions, which is essentially us adding, 2 positions. Now, yes, it's a switching of placeholders, but that's the whole purpose behind those watch positions, that after a few years, if they are, still needed, they become positions. So already before we even get into the buckets, the board is looking to, and the administration is addressing class size with those 2 positions and having those 4 watch positions there as needed. On top of that, we're recommending the additional, 2 through the buckets.
So our teaching staff, just for clarity, our teaching staff is going from, 323 up to 325?
We were 313 full-time
Yeah, I
equivalents.
couldn't remember what our numbers were. So it's going up to,
So
315.
316,
All right, whatever.
315.
Okay.
Thereabouts,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, that,
I'm sorry, I just wanted to take that as a note.
Don't hold me to it, but I believe we're at 313 full-time equivalents. So if we would add 2, we would be at 315, full-time equivalents. Keep in mind, when we're looking at full-time equivalents, we have some .4, some .6 positions, so we add those together. So bodies were more than that number, but full-time equivalents is what we go by.
And just to clarify, so we have 4 watch positions, which it seems that we hold over those 4 watch positions pretty regularly, I think. I mean, at least.
In every budget.
Right, so the 4 watch positions, plus these 2 others that are not having to do with the bucket, plus 2 more from these buckets. So, no. That's why I'm asking again for complete clarity, trying to keep up with the count here.
4 plus 2, that's it.
To go? Because I've had an education on watch positions. That was a term that was new to me in the district. And I will ask Todd and Michelle to jump in if I'm
Please feel
not
free to
explaining.
share that education with us again if
Yes,
you so choose.
and I will be happy for them to, and I think it's to our advantage. So it is a good setup the district has established many years ago. But what we are looking at for next year's budget is we will have 4 watch positions. We have 4 watch positions right now in this current budget. But in 2 of those watch positions in the current budget, it has been a position that's been in existence now for a couple of years. And the whole point of a watch position is we put it in place and then we watch to see if we need it. And for 2 of the 4, we are recommending that it becomes a TPE, a full-time, I will call it, but a position, a permanent position. Okay. So that will be the swap that is taking place, that we've added 2 permanent positions for our teaching staff. So 2 of the watches that were watches this past year will actually become now 2 permanent positions. That still leaves us within the budget with the 4 watch positions that are in the budget. Does that make sense?
I think that deserves its own visual, actually.
And the 2 from these 2.
They did. I got to admit, I drove them crazy with this. Go ahead.
Plus the 2 from these buckets.
Well, then, we weren't even discussing the buckets, but yes, on top of that, that's where you're going. On top of that, we're looking at 2 from the buckets. That is
okay,
correct.
so that makes me feel better, because one of the things that I said last year is I thought we got rid of too many teaching positions last year. So effectively, it's been validated because we're putting 2 positions back into the system by converting 2 watch positions to permanent positions, keeping our 4 watch positions and adding these 2 flex positions. It's just and I think that's great. It makes me feel better. We keep focusing, the conversation keeps being about the class size at the middle school, and I think that there's also an issue at the elementary school. I agree with everything you said last week about the high school. I think looking at all that data that you gave us, I think in general we are doing pretty darn well up at the high school, so that's great. And I'm still not quite getting an answer to my question. I don't understand what the harm is in having a 3rd flex position in the budget. If we don't need it, we won't spend the money, and next year we'll be looking at a 2017-18, expenditure projection that will reflect that we didn't need it if we didn't need it. I don't understand the problem in giving you guys as much flexibility as possible with regard to that. So that's really all I wanted to say about that.
I have to actually agree with what Susan's proposing. So I've done this for a number of years. I want to be extremely conservative. I'm very risk averse. I don't want to see us tying our hands at this point when there's so much unknown about what's happening in federal and state legislation that will impact us financially, and irrespective of the watch position discussion, there are a lot more unknowns, and I don't want to see it hit us as, oh, well, we've got to use this money for some other thing we didn't think was going to happen, and therefore our class sizes bump up again. We were saying this in curriculum. You only get one chance to go through 6th grade. And frankly, we dropped the ball this year. We went too lean last year. Lots of kids in 7th grade were in 2 large language arts classes. And that is particularly hurtful because we used to offer every kid in this district 2 language arts classes in 6th grade and in 7th grade and in 8th grade. And then through the years, we had to get rid of the second one in 8th grade. Then we got rid of the second language arts class in 7th grade. Then last year we got rid of it in 6th grade. And last year we also put kids in classes with 30 kids for 1 language arts class. And I don't think that leads to the type of education that this community, I believe, has come to expect. And they're putting their trust in us to follow through on that. And I think we dropped the ball last year. So I do not want to see us tie our hands and then some other thing happens at the federal or state level that none of us agree with, but yet comes down to our level, and we lose some of this funding, and then here we are we don't have the flexibility to solve this problem.
So
why not go with a 3rd watch position?
Because I thought I heard an answer, not sure that we all heard it. I thought I heard you saying that within this bucket, maybe it wasn't this one, that you thought that if it was necessary for yet a 3rd one, you thought we could cover it out of this bucket. Thank you. I thought I heard him say that earlier. I don't think anybody heard him.
Sorry, back to
Whichever bucket it was, this bucket.
Okay.
So then that would be less money for capital? Is that what we're saying?
No, it's in there.
No, and I appreciate that because
We'll be discussing it later in executive session is what I heard, so.
Michelle, can I just circle back around, only because I had pulled up the details of it. The IDEA pass-through money that comes from the federal government, and you didn't seem particularly concerned about it. But I had read an article that the new ACA that was passed a few days ago by the Republicans in the House called for, I'm looking at the article, an $880 billion cut in funding for Medicaid, and they're saying like $4 to $5 billion of that is for elementary and secondary schools to pay for special ed services. I mean, that's a lot, and yet you still think that our IDEA, you still think that our federal money is not going to be, you're still budgeting to get that revenue. You're not, I'm trying to think about that in balancing the $300,000 cost for the prescription as I consider your request to reduce the exceptions. That piece about Medicaid does have me concerned.
So IDEA, from my understanding, is not considered Medicaid dollars. Access funding is
The
considered.
access money. Okay.
Medicare funding. We have very little budgeted for access dollars. I'm not overly concerned about that. We do budget on the revenue side, but like I said, we have not been drawing that down only because of the appeal process that we've been in for the last few years.
So the Medicaid is only access, and you don't get that much, and we don't get other money from Medicaid? Because I feel like we talked about this whole billing thing for Medicaid services in a finance committee meeting maybe last year.
We did. We talked about it when Kevin Kane came to our meeting, and we
Right.
talked about how the excess funding has been reduced and what we had seen in the past and what we were currently seeing. And then we had the appeal process, and if you recall, we were identified to have to pay back almost $200,000. And so we just said we're not going to draw this down until we get this all resolved and we know how much money we have, because we don't want to be in a situation where we've drawn money down and then we have to pay it back.
Okay.
And that was a situation that was facing every district across the country. That wasn't just unique to Radnor with the access dollars. And I think what Michelle said before is something that's worth a discussion down the road. And when I say down the road, within the next few months or year, is the discussion of, we developed and hired a staff person to help us access those access dollars. Right. And now is it costing us more to try to access dollars that has changed. The game has changed. Even regardless of these other changes you're discussing, has already changed on us.
All right, thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions? So I guess where we go from here with regards to the budget is the goal would be at the May 23rd business meeting of the board, you'd present a revised final budget, which we can revise downward, we can never revise upward. What does that mean with regards to advertising or anything else like that?
Well, you can always go upward if you would like to do that. That would never be my recommendation, especially if you've put out a proposed final budget and you've told your taxpayers what their increase is going to be.
Because your clock starts again, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't?
But I don't think you want to, as a board, be in a position where you've told people this is how much you're going to charge them, and then you're going to charge them more. So that's never my suggestion. But what we would do is we would revise all of the numbers based on conversations that we have here, that we are having here tonight, and we'll present to you that for approval on the 23rd. In terms of advertising and things like that, we've already met all of the things that we need to do. We've advertised that we're intending to adopt the budget. We advertise that we intend to use exceptions. That doesn't mean we have to use any, all, or some. We can use whatever we desire. So there's really nothing else that we need to do in order to meet those obligations. The budget has been on the website, the proposed final. It's been out there since we approved it prior to the April meeting. If we would make the change that we talked about and reduce the exceptions by that 300,000, the current proposed final has an increase of 3.43%. If we make that $300,000 reduction, the increase would be 3.03% for taxpayers.
So the final dollar number would be less, or would it end up being kind of netted out by the transfers to capital? Because you include transfers to capital in the final budget numbers. So how does that work? I mean, I get that the exceptions would be, the tax increase would be less, but the final dollar bill of the budget would be roughly the same, and you'd make up the difference in budget transfers? Is that how you'd handle it?
It actually will be $300,000 less. The final budget will be $300,000 less. And what we will do is we will do one transfer in this year for $150,000. So you'll see that on the agenda to transfer that over to the capital budget, and then we will do another transfer for $150,000 after October 1.
Okay, one last question, because it did come up last year. I mean, isn't ultimately this is a use of fund balance for operating in holding watch positions? Now, I'm not personally against that. I advocated for that last year to save some positions and didn't go my way, and, there was a whole lot of conversation at the board level that, whether or not using fund balance is an, okay or allowable thing to do. Is that, we are still talking about, at the end of the day, that's what we're doing, right?
In bucket number 3, for the one position that
Yeah.
we presented to you, yes, you would be using fund balance in order to pay for that.
Okay.
It is an allowable thing. You can do that. There's nothing that says that you cannot.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Will we, Michelle, this proposed final budget PowerPoint here, will there be an updated one in time for the business meeting, or are we working off of?
I will do an updated
Okay.
presentation, and we'll give a very brief overview before you vote on the budget, and then, of course, you can have discussion at the board meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great.
And
All right.
since we are looking to have a vote in 2 weeks, if there are questions, continue to be questions. If there are, additional questions beyond tonight, I would encourage board members to contact Michelle directly, or contact me if there are questions. Since we would, as I think, as Patty mentioned, we would like to come back with that budget for a vote in May if possible.
Okay, awesome, thank you. All right, last thing on our list, which is a kind of a standing item for us, is the substitute teacher situation and kind of where we are for the month of April. And we've kind of been, for those of you who hadn't seen this before, we've been kind of tweaking this as we've gone, and Todd's been doing his best to give us information while still holding people, the anonymity of people and trying to be careful about any kind of disclosure that's too specific. So the intention of the Finance Committee looking at our substitute teachers is to evaluate our changes that we made to the substitute salaries and whether that's helping, the changes to the hiring service that we're using and whether that's working out for us, and trying to stay away from the personnel questions, though that definitely creeps in every once in a while. So, Todd, that said.
All right, just to answer a couple questions that were brought up earlier, as far as issues with subs, they are addressed at the building level. If a substitute becomes a continuous issue, it's brought to my level, and then what we end up doing is blocking that substitute from the district, that they are no longer able to either sub in that building or sub in the district. As far as surveys, we actually will be requesting from the substitute service this summer to send out surveys after the school year is complete to the current substitutes that did work in the district to see if there's anything we can do to make their experience more pleasurable or find out why they may not be coming to our district. If you look at the first slide there, you'll see total absences broken out by building, which is pretty typical for us. The second page, you'll notice there was 486 total absences. Fill rate for April is at 71%, which is higher than last year.
But down from last month, right?
Correct, down from last month. And some of that issue is having the Easter holiday or the spring break week in there. A lot of subs also take off and extend their time. I am pleased to say that our total absences of 486 has not been following the trend of previous months, where it has been skyrocketing from last year.
Wow, yeah, I'm pleased
So
to
that
see
number
too.
has leveled off for the month of April. It's very close to what we had last year.
Before we slide off that page, and this is where we were trying sorry, before we slide off this page and trying not to get too deep into the personnel, you guys were going to take a stab at understanding what might have been happening and why we were seeing these spikes, 3-month trend of spikes, significant increase over the prior year. Any feedback on that?
We looked into it and didn't come up with any hypothesis as why. We still don't know what would have hit those spikes.
Okay.
As far as building absences for April, there it is broken down again by building and by category. Keep in mind that the leave or FMLA could be one person out the entire month, so that could drive that number up. So it's based on federal law with the FMLA and what the staff members are allowed to use.
Todd, can you just, on this page, real quick, can't think of who it was I had a conversation with recently, but the question came up last month. I think Mike actually asked about the discrepancy between school business at the various buildings. And are you able to answer, in some cases, school business might be when teachers have to take time out to be at a team meeting of some sort. Maybe they are out for, if their students have a GIEP or an IEP or something like that.
It could be any number of
So-
reasons. It could be a conference, it could be an IEP day
Okay.
for those students. It varies. Anything that basically the school is requiring them to miss the class.
Right, so my point is that
Okay.
just based on the fact that different schools might have different numbers of children who need special meetings, conference meetings like that, could drive the variance between, for the category called school business.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. April workdays, again, if you look at the next page, what we do is we take the number of staff members in that particular building, multiply times the available days, so you get a total work days per building, which rolls into your last slide, which is percent of absences. And if you look, we're between 9 and 11% across the district. The question earlier was, do we have previous data regarding that? We do not, because of the system switch over. There was also a question earlier about the additional cost of the substitute teacher service. It's actually a net even for us and actually a savings in the long run. And what I mean by that is if you take the payroll taxers and PESers, that added up to 34%. That is what their surcharge is for us, so we are even. And as PESers increases over the next 2 years, our rate stays the same, so we're actually on a savings there as well. So I just wanted to clear that it's actually a neutral cost. We're not paying additional costs to the substitute service that we would not have already paid for payroll taxes or PESers. However, there was an increase in the daily rate, and what I can do is come back to you next month and have an idea through May how much additional dollars that cost us. We'll take the number of substitutes we had over the entire year, multiply it times $10 per day, and have a number there.
But that's
But-
also only worth it if we know that comparing it to the fill rate from previous to the bump up and after.
Correct. It would basically be, what we could do is take
So
the
it's
number
like
of absences last year,
Yeah.
if we want, and you could actually do that quickly now, the number of absences from last year times $10, and we would know for the same number of absences as last year, it would be X number of dollars.
Yeah, we paid
increased.
more, but the fill rate went up.
And then with the $10, you'd have to take $3.40 and add it on top of that, because that would be payroll and PESers, what we would have been paying or what we're paying to the substitute service.
Right.
But whole dollars are up this year just because we've had higher absence, which has
Correct.
nothing to do with where we're getting them filled.
Correct.
Okay.
Sorry. No, go.
So, we were talking some time ago last year about this substitute issue, and this is great data and everything, but if you had to give us a narrative, like this is what has happened since we took these measures and this relative to what we'd like to have seen happen if it didn't, is there some sort of encapsulating narrative about what the substitute issue looks like now as opposed to what it was when we started an intervention?
Well, basically, if you go back 5 years, the people graduating or the certificates being offered is down about 62%. So the question is, what happened roughly 5 to 6 years ago? Districts started furloughing. So when people were going into education, they're looking at districts furloughing as the job there, and this is just HR directors talking. But we're looking at that saying, well, now the correlation is these students are getting out, so there was less being enrolled, so now certificates are down being issued 62%. In addition,
Excuse me for 1 second, Todd. I know that background narrative of how the shortage came about, but I'm saying Radnor's new approach to addressing this problem. What is the narrative for that? We've been at this now for the school year, and I'm just wondering if when we set out to address this problem, we must have had some targets or goals in mind for what we wanted to see out of these new interventions to get subs. How are we doing with that from a narrative perspective? The charts do have numbers in them, but I'm looking more for a narrative.
overall, we are doing better, because the goal was to have, if we have the same number of absences this year as last year, we wanted to have a better fill rate. So if you look at the increased absences we're actually having a better fill rate with all the additional absences than
Even
we had
with the
last year.
absences.
I think some of that was the finance committee allowed us to get some building-based subs and some extra measures in there. And it's been a kind of a work in progress. As we're working with the Finance Committee and Source for Teachers and taking their recommendations, we're trying to drive those numbers up. My concern is going to be May. May is typically a big absentee month, and we've have some measures in place with those building-based subs and some other things that hopefully we can offset some of those numbers. But if I'd have to say, have we been successful to this point going to a substitute service? I believe we have, because based on the number of absences we had last year compared to this year, with an increased fill rate and the additional absences, I think we're better off than we would have
Because
been.
I think that's important, that for most of the population that isn't in on these meetings and following the graphs and the charts, all they know is what's happening in their classrooms. So if a parent were to say, so how's it going? I was so frustrated with all the absenteeism. Are we doing any better with that? I think it's important that we as a board and administration know, and with data to back it up, if in fact what we are doing is supposedly helping that situation.
I mean, am I satisfied? No, because we're not at 100%. So that means
So
somewhere.
you want to be at 100%?
That's
Sure.
our goal, is to always be at 100%.
Sure.
So we have those. So we just have to keep taking measures in trying to get to that point.
And in that one regard, I mentioned to you earlier, there is a district apparently out there that is offering retired teachers from its district the opportunity, if they are willing to make a full year's commitment to being subs, they don't get paid, but they get benefits. That's the word out there. I haven't verified it, but I thought maybe it's worth bringing that up and seeing if that's yet another way to help us out. And wouldn't it be great to have former teachers of ours come back who know our kids and know our system?
It's something we can look into, and I can report back to the Finance Committee.
And also, is there any update on the guest teacher effort?
We did have some job fairs here in the building, and we have some signs up. We're getting more signs. We have one at each building, basically, or in the bus loop, to get that name recognition out there. It is on our website, so we are trying additional efforts.
Yeah.
To increase that pool.
Because I think that would be I think that is potentially helpful, particularly in subject areas that are more technical and harder to fill. Having folks in the community who are skilled in those subject areas and may want to come in and work with kids periodically to become certified and come in and help us with the substitute issue.
The week after we had that conversation, I had a meeting with Source for Teachers and explained to them what we want the push to be as well for this community. So
Super.
they were going to work on that.
Thanks, Todd.
So I guess the only other thing that I'll add to that, because I was going to bring it up as well, is in looking at the elementary schools, when you look at the raw data, you do think, oh, wow, look at all the high school days that are out. But it's that last slide, the percentage of absences, that really demonstrates the problem's not at the high school.
Correct.
In terms of overall, but yet the high school is the most flexible with regards to the kids and what you do about a substitute, not having a substitute for the class, whereas the elementary school is not. So it's going to lead me back, and we don't have to answer it tonight, but before we exit this year, I'd like to understand whether we think having one more building sub in our portfolio on an ongoing basis is something that we should incorporate next year.
I can answer that now.
And I'm thinking
and I would
elementary
say
level.
yes.
Yeah, if that's the area, but we haven't done it, and we haven't recommended it.
Right, we've
so-
added another one, and we're
Right.
trying to acquire that. And what we do for building-based subs is I want Source for Teachers to have a certified person in there to give us more flexibility instead of a guest teacher for a building substitute. So they are out trying to recruit some certified people that we can lock in for the rest of this year, based on our conversation from last month.
Okay, good. So you are taking action on that. Okay.
I think it's important to note that even though on this chart, Radnor Elementary is at a 10.7% absentee rate. I mean, that compares with the lowest, which is Radnor High School at 9.3%. So 150 basis points difference, but we're we're hovering around that 10% mark. And so the question, I guess the big question is, how are we doing as compared to other districts, other schools?
In conversations that I've had with other HR directors in the county, we're pretty much on the pace. I mean, there may be a % or two difference, but people are looking at that 8 to 10 to 12% absenteeism. So it's not just a Radnor issue.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
This is a little bit off topic, but I wonder if it doesn't make sense for this issue to come through the curriculum committee.
We said it would.
Yeah, we have not had a discussion about this, and I'm thinking this, I wasn't aware of this exact data. I think this might have a profound impact on what's happening in the building, so, yeah.
Yeah, we did. At our last meeting, we said that there's an element
Okay.
of this that belongs at curriculum. There was a question why we were still reviewing it at finance, and we are really looking at it from a financial perspective, not from a curriculum perspective. Okay, so any other
No, thank you.
question or comment on that? If not, then let's move to public comment and see if we can wrap up this evening's discussion.
Hello, Judy Sherry. Just talking about subs, this was actually a comment brought up by Dr. Winters at the last meeting, but I thought she really had a good point, because one of these summaries, gives you the total absences, and then it indicates subs not needed. So 486 absences, subs not needed for 144 teachers, I guess, or days. And that seems significant. Which teachers, when they're not there, do not require subs? I think that would be interesting and probably something for curriculum. But that's surprising to me. It seems like a large number. Regarding the middle school, about the exceptionally large core classes, I noted at the curriculum meeting that the high school ratio is 13-1. And I'm wondering what the ratio of teachers to students is in the middle school. And again, is some of this a scheduling problem, and not just a numbers of teachers problem? It's hard to believe, because 13-1 seems pretty amazing. But it sure doesn't look that way when you start looking at the class sizes. And then one of the things that, as you were reviewing capital, that jumped out at me is that it just feels that, well, it doesn't feel it. The capital expenses, it seems like the estimation for the cost of things is much, much higher in some instances than what it's coming in. For instance, Ithan remodeling exterior cost was budgeted at $184,000. At least that's my understanding. It cost $84,000 with $100,000 left over. That's a pretty significant increase over what was estimated, and it also looks like Wayne remodeling exterior cost $159,000 with $200,000 left over, if I'm reading that correctly. And that, again, if you were estimating some project in your own house, wouldn't you be stunned if the cost came in at half of what you thought it was going to cost you?
I just want to see if I can get a clarification. I
wrong?
believe they were tied into the original construction projects. Those were just a portion.
Correct. So what you're looking at, Judy, you're not reading it correctly. Those projects were budgeted in 15-16. I don't know exactly how much they were, but the total for the two projects was over $5 million.
For the full construction.
Full construction. So what you're seeing is what was spent in 16-17, and then that $100,000 takes into consideration the original budget, what was spent year-to-date now that the project is completed, and what was spent in the previous fiscal year.
So that includes
that's what's left.
some of the contingency. You'll remember when we did those big projects, we included a contingency line on purpose for change orders. So that's like the residual of what's left over.
Yeah. Yes, okay. Well, I hear what you're saying, and perhaps it's not as significant then if you go back to the original cost, except when you look at it on these sheets, that's the message it does send you. At least that's what when I was looking at it, that's what I thought. So maybe also that needs some sort of asterisk saying the original estimate was blank or something. I don't know. And again, back to these bleachers, it does seem to me that we are overestimating for the cost for next year, that the $25,000 to $50,000 to repair the bleachers is one thing, but I don't know what engineering plans cost, but it sounded to me like they would not cost us $150,000 or $175,000. So if that's indeed the case, we should be budgeting for what they cost, and we should probably be able to get that number by contacting the engineering company and saying, what's it going to cost us for these plans? So, thank you.
Yeah, at least those dollars, though, will be left over for the actual construction, which is really what the intent is, to start to build up dollars for that, rather than taking a big hit of $1 million at one time, or whatever the big number is. It's a big number. But anyway, got your point. Anybody else?
Thank you for all the hard work. Lots of numbers. And the bucket idea was great. About just a question, and I know that there are fund balances, and there's general fund balances, and there's capital fund balances. Projected for the 2016-17 year is a surplus of $392,000, a little bit more in the numbers, at least the way I look at it.
It's not really a surplus.
Not a
It just,
surplus.
it goes back to what we were saying is rough numbers. We originally planned to balance the 16-17 budget using $1.4 million, roughly.
Oh, these are, okay, those are all the
Right, that
numbers.
was, right, we were going to balance that budget by using $1.4 million of our fund balance. Some of it came out of the PSERS. The biggest piece of it came out of the PSERS. The rest was coming out of our general fund balance to balance the budget. We had done the maximum Act 1 and the maximum exceptions, and so we had to find the money somewhere. So that's where it was coming from. But now what we're hearing is we didn't have to spend all of that money. So it's just really a reduction in the amount of money we have to take out of fund balance.
So the numbers, the
It's not a surplus.
392,000 that shows here is not.
It's not a surplus.
It's not a surplus.
No, it's,
Okay, I'm looking at
It's an underspending, Judy.
well, projected revenues minus the projected expenses, we get a difference of 392,000. But I was just saying, that could be used, can't that be used?
So this is the revenue, the 92?
Yep.
That's the expenditures, the projected expenses.
Oh, then
They're
we're higher.
higher.
Right.
I went backwards, that's the 990.
That's exactly right,
Okay,
yep.
I went backwards.
So we're just not having to use as much of our savings.
Okay, I had it.
No worries.
Professional, just a quick question, and Michelle explained where the sub is now being housed, the sub costs, in the 300 account. But we are jumping up from 692,000 to $1,074,000.
In the salary line?
In this professional and tech services line, which is where the subs now reside, correct?
Right? Right.
How much of that is subs, of that 48% increase? If you know off the top of your head, and if it isn't, it's something else.
I don't know off the top of my head. I could look in the detail and give that to
Well,
you
that's,
after the
it was
meeting.
curious, because that's a big jump.
I can look at the detail and I can show you where it is in the detail after the meeting.
Okay, thank you. And the other was just a comment, or at least it appears, which was good news. The switching of and why it shows up, this is the transportation cost, the moving of the propane expense. If you just look at the numbers, the diesel fuel is more expensive, which we know, than the propane, but it shows up.
Yeah,
in
which
these-
is what we
It shows up in these numbers.
That was part of the argument.
And I, too, would like to just comment on the 200,000 that's being budgeted for 17-18 for the bleachers. It appears to be, we've talked about cost for repair of maybe 25 to 50,000. That's another $150,000. And if I remember correctly, in the discussion about the manufacturing company that's coming in to talk with you, they're going to offer some kind of a design for the bleachers. And that, if that would be seriously considered without having to hire an engineer as a potential design for the new bleachers, that would save, because I understand it's free. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Are you on public comment duty?
I am public comment duty.
Okay,
We have two.
all right.
This is from Chapin Lenthal Cleary. Last year, the Radnor Township School Board made an important choice. The board chose to replace retiring teachers. This choice meant that the seminar pre-calculus class contained 15 students and the other seminar pre-calculus class a similar number of students. This choice also has had positive effects on other classes. If the board had not chosen to replace the retiring teachers, my seminar pre-calculus class would have contained more than 30 students. The choice was very important. Seminar pre-calculus is a challenging course, and many of the concepts taught therein take work to understand. With the small class size, it is possible for students to ask questions to the teacher and for the teacher to answer those questions. With a difficult course such as seminar pre-calculus, being able to ask questions is imperative for understanding the material being taught. With a small class size, the teacher can also help students individually when those students are working on in-class problems. This is only practical in a small class. Class sizes for difficult courses such as seminar pre-calculus, staying small is imperative for students succeeding in said courses. Knowing the rigor of the course from personal experience as well from conversational anecdotes, I understand the importance of keeping class sizes small so that my peers and my juniors can succeed in seminar pre-calculus and other difficult courses in the years to come. The Radnor Township School District mission statement is to inspire all students and the love of learning and creating, and to empower them to discover and pursue their individual passions with knowledge, confidence, and caring to shape the future. If we truly wish to empower our students to succeed in difficult courses that may be getaways to future careers, we must allow those students a chance to ask questions, a chance to receive individual feedback, a chance to understand fully if we truly wish to empower our students for success. We must give them a chance to learn. Thank you for giving me, my peers, and older students the chance to succeed in a very difficult course. I hope that my peers and my juniors will receive a similar opportunity in the years to come. This is from Mr. Matthew Holtman. We're reading it again because it was meant for this meeting, not the curriculum meeting, so we're putting it on the record for this meeting.
Okay.
Esteemed school board members, I would like to lend my voice in support of the continued efforts to maintain smaller class sizes across Radnor schools. I recognize that class size is an important impact on the budget. However, reducing class sizes is one of the simplest and most consistently effective ways to improve student outcomes. There is a strong research evidence that shows the benefits of smaller class sizes includes higher test scores in math and language, better non-cognitive skills, and even higher earning potential in early adulthood. All Radnor residents benefit from our excellent schools. The draw of high-quality school district is one of the most important reasons for Radnor's high property values and healthy tax base. We should be careful not to let educational quality erode for the sake of short-term budgetary gains. Thank you for your efforts.
Thank you. Hello.
Hi, my name is Sarah Dunn, and I live on Blackfriar Road in Rosemont. I actually was coming tonight. I'm very pleasantly surprised to hear that you're putting in 2 watch positions. I'm coming as the parent of a 6th grader. I showed up to the budget meetings last year, I think a little too late. We were all concerned about the positions that were being closed. And my 6th grader came home the second week of school this year and said, "Mom, how is my accelerated language arts teacher supposed to teach all these novels with 31 students in the class?" And when a 12-year-old recognizes that there's an issue, shame on all of us for not realizing it long before. Compounded on that was the fact that halfway through the year, her teacher went on sabbatical, and they had a substitute show up who now had to all over again acclimate with 31 students who at age 12 are not unexpectedly a bit rowdy sometimes. And I think it's been a very big challenge for her. So I really appreciate that so quickly as you walk into the district, you recognize this need and are trying to address it as quickly as possible. And I also really appreciate that the board recognizes that and they're all willing to accommodate Mr. Batchelor's actions. So thank you very much for taking these actions.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening.
Any other? Okay, then I'm calling it quits. Good night.